Interviewing for a job is never a piece of cake. It takes extensive prep, a lot of courage, expertise, and sometimes stars need to align. You need to wear your lucky underwear. I get it. It's a really tough job. When I had my first interview 15 years ago, I wish someone gave me these golden rules that it took me a decade to learn. I promise you, if you follow these principles, you can get the job of your dreams, and you can thank me for it. So today I'll talk about how to crack the product manager interview. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about my favorite topic, which is me. I'm Valentine. I'm Turkish Spanish, if you can't figure out by the accent or the charm. I'm an executive coach. I train people on A to Z, any and every aspect of the business, strategic planning, goal setting, giving and receiving feedback. I do corporate trainings. Of all the topics, my strong suit is interviewing. The reason why is when I worked at Facebook, I launched an office in India and Philippines, Dublin. So I constantly interviewed people, and that's how I developed this skill. I was there for 8 years. And as I mentioned, I worked in multiple countries with Facebook. My last role was SVP of product at Bands in Town, which is a concert discovery platform that curates a list of live music events based on your music taste. You may or may not know, it's the best kept secret with 50 million users. And before that, I was at Colgate and Palmolive and IBM. Okay, so throughout my career, I said I interviewed thousands of people, and every so often I witness a stellar candidate do so poorly in the interview, not because they're not good at their job, but they just don't follow these rules. So what are they? Let's take a quick look at them. These two guys spent the first half of the movie preparing for the interview. And the lesson to be learned here is this is the most important rule. If you have the perfect prep, not only you'll be able to answer all the questions, but it will boost your confidence. And it will help you ask the right questions and answer the questions that you get. Google is your best friend. Use it wisely. Use other resources like Glassdoor or LinkedIn. Digest their company website. Understand their values, their goals, their major principles, what their hot projects, read a lot of articles, and not only the company, but their competitors. And this is incredibly important because only if you know enough about their competitors, you will be able to position this company in the market, and you will be able to tell in what ways they're better than their competitors or how their competitors are better. So when they ask you questions about how to improve the product, you will have a lot of thought starters based on your competitive analysis. Next is brevity is a virtue. So you made great efforts to prep. You know everything and anything, and you are ready to kill. And you start the interview, and you'll talk, and talk. My best practice to you, best tip, is pause. Because PMs need to have spectacular communication skills. They need to be very succinct and very to the point. When I ask any question to a candidate, I don't expect them to give me an answer right away. I'd rather have them take like 20, 30 seconds or tell me, hey, this is a good question. It's a good tip to gain sometimes. Like, that's a good question. Let me think about it. And think about it, and then give it to me in one single shot. If you cannot explain your idea or your proposal in 2 to 3 minutes, you know it's not a good idea, or you know you're being very lengthy. Time yourself when you are doing like maybe mock-up interviews with your friends, or on the internet. There are a couple of websites which I can tell you at the end of this seminar. There are a couple of websites where you can be matched to other candidates looking for jobs, and then you have an hour session, and then you two interview each other. So half an hour you interview them, and then half an hour they interview you. So you can use tools like this. And when you do your mock interviews, time yourself. The moment you see 2 to 3 minute mark, you know that you need to start wrapping up. You probably said too much. Don't try to say anything and everything. If they have any questions, they will ask. Don't try to go into too much detail, because believe it or not, adult attention span is very limited and it's less than 4 minutes. I probably lost half of you right now. Okay, back to me. So it's not how much you say, it's what they retain. So be very succinct. Be selective with the information that you share. For example, when they say, oh, tell me a little bit about yourself, do not start from your high school years or you're from college education. Maybe talk about your current role or the last role, and then be very selective. Instead of talking about every single project or every single job you had, look at the role that you're applying for and figure out what part of your resume is the most relevant and give them 2 to 3 statements. When I work with my clients, by the way, shameless plug, if you like the content, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to coach you one-on-one. When I work with my clients, the first thing we do is developing a personal impact statement. That has 3 components, which is not 3 paragraphs, basically 3 sentences. The first one is what you're doing right now. The second one is what you did before. And then the third one is your wow factor. This wow factor is really important because that's how you capture people's attention. This personal impact statement is a great opener in an interview. Or let's say you're in a networking event and you find yourself, you bump into a recruiter from your dream company and they're like, hey, how are you? And you have literally 30 seconds. And this is your personal impact statement. Who you are, what you're doing, and you need to have your wow factor. For example, I can say, I opened an office for Facebook in India. So that would be like, oh, okay, who are you? I'm intrigued, right? So find your wow factor, and this is very important, so that you are very succinct, very brief. You tell them 1 or 2 things rather than covering all your resume. So my tip is pause, reflect, strategize, and then communicate. Interviewers like to know how your past experiences are relevant to the job position that you're applying for. Some of you may have multiple careers, maybe like product marketing and then product design and then product manager, and then maybe you did some sales and then came back to product, right? So be very selective. Look at the job position. Let's say you can see that the job position is very data heavy. They're looking for great data skills, maybe market research experience, A/B testing, things like that. Then maybe you don't really have to talk about your awesome marketing experience or how good you were in finance or how good you were in XYZ. So find out, okay, I'm a great product manager or project manager, and these are the projects that are relevant to the job. Focus on impact. This is incredibly important. When I was at Facebook, in every office I worked at, there would be posters all around the office that said focus on impact. This comes not only for the interview, but for your resume as well. There's a sad truth that I would like to share. 90% of the resumes that I get on a daily basis do not cover impact. It's merely a list of tasks or projects that they did. But the result is missing. So your resume, I wasn't planning on covering it today, anything about resume, but let me take a couple of minutes. Your resume, again, it's not a long laundry list of what you did on a day-to-day basis. It's your impact. It's the results that you produced. It's the outcome. It's the goals that you achieved. So we want to know, it could be number of users, it could be acquisition, it could be engagement, it could be revenue, it could be feature adoption. So you will tell them what you did, right? Maybe you oversaw the entire user acquisition flow. Great. But then I have to know what the result was. So you, let's say, increased user acquisition by 200% from 10 million to do the math. Right? So I want to know the starting point, the end point. When you talk about impact, you can talk about it in multiple ways. It could be percentages. Oftentimes, percentages don't make a lot of sense to me and to most people that I know. So let's say it could be 200%. You increased it by 17%, lowered the cost or by 17%. I will not know what that 17% means. So if in those cases, it's always a good idea to follow up with actual number. For example, you lowered the user acquisition cost by 17%. It used to be $30, now it's 17. So that I know, oh, okay. Or you improved the revenue, the product revenue by X%, which translates to additional $2 million per year. A couple of examples. Again, in the interview, when you talk about the projects, don't just tell them what you did or what your responsibility was as a product manager or project manager or product designer, but tell them what you actually achieve so that you wow them. The second situation where impact come into play is prioritization. You're going to be asked a lot of prioritization questions. The first thing that you look at is impact. Of course, prioritization is a complex phenomenon. It's not only about the impact. You look at costs, you look at dependencies, risk, external factors. There's a lot, but your starting point is always impact. No matter what job you apply for, you will be hired for your great ideas. You will be hired to make a change in that company. The product managers or product owners are expected to be very creative, be visionary, right? So you're not just doing what everybody else is doing, but you're bringing your big idea. So you're expected to look at the existing business with a fresh pair of eyes, be very critical about it. So when you do your prep, you have to think about, take a red pen to their product and see what ways that the product is not working for you. You try to use the product. Find people, if you're not, let's say, you're not necessarily the target audience, talk to people talk to their customers to understand if they're happy with their product or not. When I interview people, I want them to be brutally critical of my product. If they cannot tell me multiple ways to improve it, I don't know the point of hiring that person. This is problem-solving problems, yeah. The interviewers are interested in how you tackle daily problems and how you would improve their product. So they will probe into the creativity and scalability, measurability, feasibility of your ideas. So they may ask you stuff to take you out of your comfort zone. For example, design a parking lot. You're like, oh, okay. I thought I was interviewing for Spotify. You're asking me to design a product, parking lot. Or they may ask you, today actually I had a client, I asked it's a tech consumer-facing product. I asked him, can you design a product for pet owners, a mobile app for pet owners? It has nothing to do with what they're applying for. But this way, I am trying to gauge how they would go about the ideation, understanding the solution, and then coming up with creative ways. So when you get questions like this, you will be caught off guard. Because as interviewers, we know the questions that we're going to ask. You don't. So tough job. Again, don't jump into answering the question right away. Take a couple of minutes, right? Set boundaries. Parking lot, okay. If I were to answer this question, I would be like, okay, where is this parking lot? Is this San Diego or New York? That's setting boundaries. Then agree on the goals. For example, I asked for I said, design me an app for pet owners. He immediately jumped the gun and then started generating ideas. But he never asked me what I was trying to accomplish, right? Like, what is the goal? What are we trying to solve? Is it, it's to get a walker for your pet, or is it like your pet's health, feeding schedule? What is it? So again, for this parking lot question, I would be like, what are we trying to solve here? Is this going to be a luxury parking lot, or should I maximize the capacity? So I'm trying to get as many cars as possible to maximize the revenue. So only if I can understand what their needs are, then I can actually design the right parking lot. Okay, So now I'm going to talk about the most important part of the presentation. So if you do not take anything from this seminar, and it should be like, if you take only one thing, it should be this. When you're asked for innovation, okay, think about big solutions. And I'll give you guys 3 examples to clarify what I really mean. In the past, I used to ask candidates like, oh, what is one thing that, like, how would you improve our platform? What would you fix on our mobile app, right? And then I would get some answers. It would be like, oh yeah, the filtering option doesn't work properly, or like, oh, let's move this button here, or like, oh, this button doesn't really work well, right? And I would get all these trivial things, but I'm not looking for it. I'm looking for something big. So I started changing my questions to, what is the number one thing to fix on our platform? Which means I am going to stop, drop everything I'm doing right now, and I'm going to fix that problem because it is so detrimental to user experience and it is getting in the way, so it's high priority. So now, when I started asking the question this way, it completely changed the nature of the answers that I get. Because now people are like, oh, okay, like that filter idea that I had, or the button that doesn't work, yeah, it doesn't work, we should fix it, but we're not gonna drop everything, right? So you really need to give me something big. The second example, I used to ask, give me an idea, product idea to build on our platform. And I would get a lot of answers, but again, not good enough. So now I ask, what is your $1 million product idea to build on our platform? It has to be $1 million. It has to be something that I haven't heard before 10 times from candidates, or I didn't think about myself, or our competitors are not doing. It needs to be really, really big, because I'm not going to settle down for anything less than $1 million worth. And then the third question I would ask is, what are some strategies we can implement to improve our monthly active user, improve our engagement? Again, I would get some answers, not good enough. So now I ask, give me a strategy to implement to double our MAU in 1 month. Then you're like, whoa, we're doubling MAU in 1 month? Like, okay, I better give them something big, okay? So now keep in mind that you may not get these questions in this format, right? I've been interviewing for a decade now, so I know how to ask questions to get the answers that I want, but not everybody does. So if you don't get these questions like this, I want my voice to echo in your brain and be like, okay, I'm not just going to give any idea, but it has to be $1 million worth. It has to be number one thing to fix. It has to be something that's going to double, triple, quadruple that metric overnight. It has to be very big. And this is how you solve problem-solving questions. You can be a product designer. You're not going to make your design decisions based on how good it looks to your eye, but it's going to be based on data. Again, if you're a product manager, the product flow, the user acquisition flow, engagement, all the placement of the buttons, everything needs to be based on data. So this is really important. Some questions you may get. My of all time's favorite. If you got this job, what metrics would you monitor on a daily basis? As the product manager of X, product or company or service, if you're asked to build a dashboard to monitor weekly or to report to high-level management, how would that dashboard look? What metrics would you put in there? Another question I could ask is, let's say you're the product manager for X, you see an overnight drop of 30% in blah, blah, blah. It could be, if you're applying for Google, for example, I could say, you realize the number of emails sent per day dropped by 10%. How would you go about analyzing it? What kind of data would you look at? Or like if you're applying for Spotify, I could ask, you realize the user acquisition, the subscription signups dropped by 30% in a week, like week over week. How would you go about? So like a lot of like these questions will be a good exercise for your brain to see what kind of data points you could look at. What else? How would you measure the success of XYZ, so whatever platform or company you're applying for. So I want to understand what kind of data would you use. So that's for this company. Also for your current role or your last role, what kind of data did you use? A lot of people have good narrative on what they did. They always fail at explaining how they did, right? Like they say, oh, I was in charge of all the XYZ funnel. Great. And then I ask them, oh, okay, tell me about a project. Tell me about your biggest project. They tell me, but they never talk about what data they used. It always feels like a storyline. Oh, I went to the data team, I talked to marketing, and I did this, I did that. You can skip all that narrative and all the storytelling. Instead, just tell me, based on data, I used XYZ data, right? So it is really important that you go home tonight, look at your resume, look at all the tasks that you listed. First of all, if it's a trivial task, not huge impact, probably shouldn't be on your resume. So first fix that. Then look at all the projects that you did and try to remember what metrics you used in the past so that you are ready to answer these questions. Another data question, not my favorite, but you can get an estimation question. For example, how many people are sleeping in the world right now? I'll give you a secret. Nobody knows. It changes based on the time of the day. So depending on what time your interview is, the answer will be different. They're probably not aware of the answer either when they ask estimation questions like this, like how many ping pong balls can we fit in this room? It's a classic another question. It doesn't matter what you say. It matters how you articulate your thought process, right? So you can think about, okay, there are 24 hours in a day. I'll presume that average person sleeps for 8 hours a day, right? Always make estimations, use logic, make assumptions, right? In this case, I'm assuming average person sleeps for 8 hours. Okay, 24 hours, 24 divided by 8, it's 3. Okay, so 1/3 of the world should be sleeping. The world is 7.5 billion divided to 3. Okay, I'm just going to say around 2.5 billion. That's my guess, right? May or may not be true. You may do it in completely different ways as well, as long as you are thinking out loud and you have a base to your answers. Okay. And here comes the situational questions to cover soft skills, such as leadership, teamwork, communication, prioritization. What else? People managing. Yeah, so all these more like how you work and soft skills. These questions will often sound like, tell me about a time you did XYZ, right? Tell me about a time you managed a team. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a peer. Tell me about a time you managed a cross-functional project. So there are endless questions like this. That being said, they're all variations of one another. What I would recommend is go to Google, write behavioral questions or situational questions, and the first 3 links will pop up and we'll give you maybe 40 to 50 questions each. You can go to Glassdoor, you can go to biginterview.com. Oh, note this down. I typically don't drop names, but this one I love, biginterview.com. So they have a lot of interviewing resources. So find these popular questions, put them on a Google document or a Word document, or print them out. And for the next, let's say you have 100 of them, for the next 10 nights, before you go to bed, take 10 questions and answer them. This is like, you have to flex this muscle. There's no other way. If you want that beach body, you got to go to gym, you got to flex those muscles, right? Like this is, like if you want to be able to answer these questions, you need to be exposed to many of them and then go down the memory lane because you cannot make up things. I can always tell as an interviewer when someone is inventing stuff versus trying to remember, your face completely changes. So it's really important that you have a question bank or like answer bank of all these different scenarios. So at this point, someone raises their hand and say, but Valentine, what if we don't have the experience that they're looking for? For example, I'm pretty junior in my career. I never managed a team, and they're now asking me if I managed a team, right? So I don't have that people managing experience. How do I answer? I say, no, you did. They're like, no, you don't know me. I'm like, I know you because you probably, you managed in college, right? Maybe you were the captain of a club, or you had a project group and you were the leader of that project group in college. In your current job, you are in charge of new hire onboarding and education. So you're in charge of their utilization and productivity and training them. Yes, you are not necessarily their manager, but you're their mentor. So talk about that. What about that volunteer activity? You were in charge of all the volunteers, right? Volunteer education, recruiting. You manage those volunteers. So that's a volunteer experience. So what I'm trying to say here is try to find relevant examples. It doesn't have to be 100% same. We're just looking for similar experience that you demonstrated the skills that needed for this role. Okay, cool. Moving on. This is another tricky one. Typically, early on, I asked if you are in the product area. There's only one person who's not a product manager or designer or anything product related. Typically, half the room is non-product people, and they're in the seminar to learn more about product management and how to get a job. So this slide was mostly for those people, but I'll go over it anyways. So sometimes I interview a product manager and ask a question like, oh, how can we increase our user acquisition? And then they go, oh yeah, I have a lot of ideas. Let's run paid media on Facebook, Instagram, App Store. Let's have free giveaways. Let's have some partnership with festivals and this and that. And I stop them and I say, hey, these are all good answers, but you're interviewing for a product role, and we don't do any of these things in this team, like none of it. If you interviewed for a marketing position, you would be a great fit, right? So keep in mind what role you're interviewing for and what they do, and answer the questions from the domain of your future job and not your past experiences. Okay, so you think you did a good job, right? Great interview, you nailed it, you're ready to end the interview, right? Not quite yet, because the most important part of the interview is yet to come. The questions you ask at the end of the interview will make it or break it. Refrain from asking questions that can be Googled easily or trivial. Sometimes I have a killer candidate. They're great. They answered all my questions. And then I'm like, hey, do you have a question for me? And they go, can I work from home? And I'm like, ooh, first of all, that's a question to ask to the recruiter, not your hiring manager. But I say like, okay, that's the most important thing, right? Like, is that what you want to ask me? Like, you have 2 minutes, right? This is also my pet peeve because when I was single and used to be on dating apps, I would get like the first question would be like, oh, where do you live? How old are you? I'm like, first of all, it's how young are you? Thank you. Secondly, is my age the most important? Like you said hi, and this is the most important question. That's not a good start, right? So try to find great questions, because I cannot tell you how many times I have a meh interview. The candidate did not do well, but then when it's their time to ask questions, I'm bombarded with great questions, and they're like, oh, tell me about this. What do you think about this? And I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't, what do you think? And then it's like, because when we go to an interview, I know the questions, but you don't. So you have some excuse not to give me the right answers, but you have zero excuse for not asking the right questions. So here's how you ask the right questions. I'm glad you asked. First, have you ever raised your hand, and this is, I'm not trying to shame, but I will. I won't. Raise your hand if you ever had an interview, you walked into that interview or phone interview without knowing the name or the title of the person. I did it, right? Like, has that ever happened to you? Like somebody called, but like you didn't really know. This is like some of you, I can see you have the guilty eyes, the puppy eyes, but you're not raising your hand because it happens a lot. Never go into interview without knowing whom you're going to talk to. Insist on, like when you're talking to a recruiter, ask them their name, their title, their LinkedIn profile. If you can't find it easily, ask them a link to their LinkedIn profile and study their background. Study what their role is, what companies they worked for. So this is the most important thing you can do. Because if you have a common denominator with that person, you will be able to build a rapport easily. And this can, you don't have to wait till the end of the interview. Since the beginning of the interview, you could be like, oh, I checked out your LinkedIn and I realized you worked at IBM. I was there too 7 years ago. Like what, or like, oh, I realized you took a wine master's degree in wine, right? Like, could be. Like, it's like, I am a big wine person. It's like, or like, you know, like it's a great conversation starter. And at the end of the day, interviewing is like dating. It's sad, but it's true. Like they need to like you. They need to want to work with you. So it's, yeah, like half of the trick is give them the right answers, but the other half is make sure they're going to like you. Another sad truth is vast majority of the interviewers make their decision within 5-10 minutes, or maybe 5 or 4. Some of them shake your hand and then they have an impression on you. So if you know them very well, and in the beginning of the interview and throughout the interview, you make it obvious that like, okay, you studied their background and you're asking them relevant questions, it will work in your favor. Okay, so you stalk their LinkedIn, and then when it's time for you to build a report, use that information. You can ask a couple of different type of questions. The first question types is about the work itself. For example, you can ask, oh, what are the most exciting projects that you're working on right now? Or what are your main challenges? What are your top 3 goals? What is your biggest goal you're trying to achieve this quarter, right? Like all these things are not on the internet. And I would want to know what the most exciting project is, right? And so you can talk a little bit about the work itself. You can ask questions related to the industry. You can say, oh, I realized, let's say you're applying for a music streaming company and there's like, there's Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora. It's a lot. So like you can ask like, oh, okay, what do you think about XYZ company expanding in certain ways, but you guys are not really investing in that area from what I can tell. What are your thoughts? So you can ask questions about the industry. The third one is you can ask about, and this is probably like very like most important thing for me is work culture. Like, am I going to be a good fit, right? So you can talk about, tell me about the relationship between the product team and the data team, or tell me about the dynamics between engineering and product. Like, because I care as a person, I care about the company culture, I care about collaboration. I want to understand the processes. You can ask like, oh, is your company agile? Or like, Spotify does a really good job of bringing transparency to their product management teams, like, or how engineering or how their teams work. and other companies too, like tribes, squads, and this and that. So you can ask a lot of questions about how actually they work. Another thing that I'm personally curious about, which you don't have to ask, but I always ask, is my growth, right? When I get a job in a company, it's, yes, I am the candidate, but I'm also interviewing them because they have to prove to me that this is the right fit and there's an opportunity for me to grow in that company as much as I will bring some value. So I ask questions about like, how do you see this role evolving in the next year? Can you talk about performance evaluation in your company? Can you talk about your people? Like, for example, whenever I interview with the hiring manager, so like the boss, the manager of that role, I always ask about, okay, tell me about your management style. If I talk to your reports, what would they tell me about you? Or what is one area of development you're working on, right? Like I like to put people on the spot as well. They asked me, why can't I ask them? So it's like, ask it. Sometimes I ask if I can't read the interviewer, I can ask, how did I do? Right? Like whenever I tell this to my clients, when I do one-on-one coaching, how did it go? And they're like, I don't know. I think I did well, but I'm not sure. What do you mean? You didn't ask them? They're like, was I supposed to ask them? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how do I ask? Exactly like this. How did I do? Do you have any feedback for me? Do you have any concerns? What are the red flags that you were able to identify? Right? It's totally fair to ask these things, and it will work in your favor because I think it was like a year and a half ago, I think, when I interviewed for a role, and there was no feedback cycle, and then I had like 7 interviews, and then finally with the CPO of the company, Chief Product Officer, and then I told them, I was like, there was a 0 feedback loop. I have no clue how I did. Like, I would love to hear from you. What does your team think about my strengths or some red flags you identify? And the guy was like, oh, I'm sorry that no one told you, but like these are the things, like we loved you for XYZ, but these are the concerns that we have, like these 2 red flags. And then I'm so glad I asked because I said, I'm glad I asked. I would actually love to clarify those areas. So for each red flag or concern they had, I said, oh, to address the first concern, I did X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. Here's my impact. And during the interview loop, I never got a chance to talk about these things. So it's totally fair for you to have those concerns or think that I don't have that X, Y, Z expertise or skill. And then for your second concern, here's why I am so awesome that you shouldn't have that concern. Okay, one thing that I forgot like 20 minutes ago. The 4th type of question that you can ask is, remember I said 3 types. The 4th one is personal questions. It doesn't have to be relevant to the job or the company or anything. You can say, hey, I was looking at your LinkedIn and I realized that you worked at this company, like cryptocurrency company in or XYZ. What do you think of, just like out of context, but I'm really curious to know your thoughts on the whatever cryptocurrency stuff. Like this is an area that I don't know anything about. Why did I choose this example? So like this, damn, okay. Another one. What are your thoughts on XYZ, right? Like it can be, like maybe you're applying for a music streaming platform, but you spent 2 years at a cryptocurrency company and then they did too. And then, there are some current events or news and you want to talk about that. That's totally okay too. And it doesn't have to be vastly different. It can be like any kind of personal experience. I saw that you worked, let's say you're applying to Facebook, and then this person that you're applying used to work at LinkedIn. You can say, how do you think LinkedIn compares to Facebook in terms of culture, in terms of this? So you can ask questions about their background. It could be personal. The question was, what is your personal goal? Did I say it right? Okay, what's your personal goal? Here, it's a thoughtful question. They're trying to understand how driven you are in life. Because your personal, like to me, there's a difference between someone who watches Netflix all day and then goes to work and then this versus someone who has XYZ hobbies, a wine collector, loves snowboarding. Their goal is to snowboard 5 weeks a year and this and that. Like to me, that shows like, because you're very driven in life and that will reflect to your work as well. So you can talk about your personal goals, what you're trying to achieve. It could be your dreams, how you measure your happiness, what's personal success to you, because at work we all know how success is measured in terms of your performance, but how do you measure success in your personal life? So I think it's a good question. Feel free to answer it. Yeah. Okay. Almost the end. Passion is golden. So here, I get it. You may not check all the boxes. You may think that you don't check all the boxes. And this is where your passion comes into play. Show them that you really, really care about this job. I always say, like when you interview for a role, like make sure that they really think, or your energy conveys, like your passion, like you really want this job because you believe in that company and you're open to learning. Talk about the things that you learned on the job in the past so that they know that you're coachable, your ability to learn. When they talk about their red flags, or maybe you told them your areas of development, let's say, I remember maybe like 5-10 years ago, I wasn't a good data person. And I was honest about it in the interview, and I knew that I didn't do so well in terms of like data questions. So this is where my passion helped me get that job, because I said, hey, I'm really passionate about this job and I'm really passionate about data. And here's what I'm doing. I signed up to say a product school data course. I am taking an online course on Google Analytics. I am in my team, I'm the junior data person. I'm asking everybody to assign me their data tasks so that I can practice. And then last thing is I'm doing this weekend data workshop. So in the next 3 months, this is where I'm going to be. And I got the job with I was probably the worst in terms of data of all the other people, but that's where my passion helped, right? So you're very honest about your shortcomings and then show them that you have a plan to work on them. Okay, my last gem for you is to be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Be very honest. You're probably not a good actor, because if you were, you would be interviewing on Broadway and you wouldn't be here. And don't be shy or overly polite. Just relax. Honestly, confidence is the name of the game. As I told you, half the interview is, yes, answering their questions, but the other half is make sure that they like you. Like, feel free to crack a joke. Have some icebreakers, maybe compliment on their blouse or whatever, right? So like, be very casual. Yeah. And remember, you're a rock star. You got this. And what else I can say? Also, you have absolutely nothing to lose. If you don't get the job, you'll go to Red Lobster, have some biscuit, feel good about yourself, right? I also gonna have a quick Oprah moment here. I teach yoga as well, and I always say my mantra in life is, what's meant for me will never miss me, and what misses me was never meant for me, right? So there's no such thing as missing the right opportunity. The right opportunity is the one that you have, so use it wisely. Okay, before I'm gonna end with my favorite topic again, me. These are the areas that I help my clients in interview skills coaching. First step is resume building. So we can review the resume and revamp it, rewrite it based on your wow factor, your impact. If you are not applying to a company via referral, which is my other tip, don't just like submit resumes. If you think you can find, let's say you look at LinkedIn and your friend's friend works at the company that you want to work for, always use those connections because your resume will be prioritized. And if you apply through the general pool, you need to have a spectacular resume, not only the content, but the formatting as well. And it's an art that they don't teach at school. So I can definitely help you with that. Background development, your elevator pitch, personal impact statement, talking about your professional experience in a way that it will be relevant to other people. Interviewing tips. I just covered 10 of them, but I have hundreds of tips, so I can definitely help you. Question types, there's so many different question types, critical thinking, behavioral, data, teamwork, leadership, prioritization, time management, meeting facilitation, you name it, I get an example for it. And then mock interview. I think I am the most brutal interviewer out there. So if you pass my exam, you'll be golden. And the last part is project development. A lot of companies may ask you to develop a mini project in the final round. I know a lot of my clients get this. They can give you a problem to solve, or they can ask you to ideate on something or develop a product. So if you get to that level, which is a good problem to have, we can definitely work together to solve that problem. I also do presentation skills and public speaking coaching as well. So I can help you present that project. So this is about me. My name is Valentine Aseyo. You can find me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much, everyone.